The notice came to her through a woman named Dora Winship, who kept a boarding house on the edge of Fort Macleod and had a habit of reading other people's mail if it sat too long on the common table. It was a Thursday early March, when the snow still came sideways off the foothills, and the town felt like something the weather had not yet decided to keep. She had been in the boarding house 6 weeks. Before that, the farm east of Pincher Creek. Before that, a life she no longer had the same name for. She read the notice once standing at the window and once sitting at the edge of her cot. Agricultural claim, Alberta foothills. Help needed maintaining the homestead through spring and into summer. Arrangement discussed upon arrival. Respond to the post office at Longview, care of the land claim number, which was printed in small, neat numerals in the bottom right corner. The handwriting was not neat. It was the handwriting of a man who had learned to write for function and had stopped there. She had not been widowed long enough to have grown accustomed to the word, 14 months. The thresher had taken her husband on a morning that looked like every other September morning, and the land had followed him into the ground by Christmas, the way debt does when there is no one left to argue with it. She had signed papers she did not want to sign and walked out of the county office with her coat buttoned wrong and had not noticed until she was 2 blocks down the street. She wrote back the same evening, a short letter. She did not describe herself in terms that would appeal to a man looking for a woman rather than a worker. She described what she could do. She had kept a kitchen garden and a root cellar and a laying flock of 22 birds. She had managed accounts and ordering at the Pincher Creek General Store for 3 seasons when the owner's wife had been ill. She could calve in cold weather, set a fence post without asking, and had once re-roofed a grain shed with her brother-in-law over the course of a long weekend in October. He wrote back in 9 days. 2 sentences. The claim is north of Longview, 7 miles on the secondary road past the cattle gate. Come when you can before the mud sets in. She came on the last Tuesday of March. The bus from Fort Macleod let her out on the highway at the junction for Longview, and she walked the last quarter mile into town with her case in one hand and her bag over her shoulder. The foothills white above the tree line and the sky a hard, clear blue that meant it had been cold the night before and would be cold again. The town was small, a grain elevator, a co-op, a coffee counter that also served as the post office, 3 streets of houses that had been built with optimism and maintained with varying degrees of it. She went to the coffee counter and asked for the man by the claim number. The woman behind the counter, whose name tag said Mabel, looked at her the way people in small towns look at someone who has arrived without an explanation that precedes them. She said the claim number was Hargreaves. She said his first name, which was Bram, and then she said the road. She said it the way you say a road when you have opinions about the road. She asked if there was a way out to the claim. There was not at this hour. She could ask at the co-op whether anyone was going north, or she could wait until morning. She waited at the coffee counter for 2 hours and drank 2 cups she did not need and watched the door. At 3:15, a man came in for a box that had been held for him. He was going north, past the cattle gate. He did not offer. She asked, and he said yes with the particular economy of a man who found most communication unnecessary. The road past the cattle gate was secondary in the way that suggested it had once been a track and had been upgraded to a road by the addition of gravel, some of which remained. The fields on either side were pale brown and flat, the snow gone except where it had drifted into the fence lines and the low places. She sat in the passenger seat with her bag on her lap and watched the land. She was reading it, the way it sat, the way the soil at the road's edge looked when the frost came out of it, the way the fence lines ran. She was storing it the way you store information you expect to need. The man let her out at a cut-line track that he said was the one. She thanked him. He drove on. The track went uphill slightly toward a stand of spruce, and beyond the spruce she could see a roof. She picked up her case and walked. The place came into view all at once as the track curved. A house, 1 story, board and batten, painted a dark red that had gone brown in places where the weather had found it first. A machine shed to the left, larger than the house, with a metal roof that had been patched in 2 places with what looked like galvanized tin of a slightly different gauge. A barn beyond it, old, the board silvered, the door on a track that had come partially free of its upper mount, so that the door hung at an angle and would need to be lifted as well as slid. Behind the house, out of sight but audible, chickens. She stood at the edge of the yard and did not hurry. A man came out of the machine shed. He was perhaps 40 or 45, worn into 40, with the particular build of someone who had done physical work so long that it was structural now, part of how he stood. He wore a canvas work jacket with a tear at the left elbow that had been there long enough to look intentional. He stopped at the shed door and looked at her across the yard. He did not come forward. She walked to him. She said she was the one who had answered the notice. He said he had figured. A silence followed that was neither hostile nor welcoming. He looked at her case, then at the barn door hanging wrong on its track, then back at her. He said the house was not large. She said she had been in small houses. He said the well was good. He said it the way a man says the one honest thing he can offer without embellishment, which told her something about how he had decided to present what he had here. He lifted her case. She walked beside him to the house. Inside, a kitchen and a main room that were the same room, a wood stove with an enamel top, a table with 2 chairs, a window facing east, a shelf with a tin of coffee and a tin of salt and nothing else. Swept, she noted that. He swept before she came and she did not know which yet. The room that would be hers was off the kitchen, small, with a cot and a wooden rod across the corner for hanging things, and a window that faced north and caught no afternoon light. She stood in the doorway and looked at it. She was not discouraged, she was cataloging. He stood in the kitchen doorway while she set her bag down. He said supper was whatever she found because he had not planned well. She opened the cabinet beside the stove. Oats, a tin of beans, half a pound of salt pork wrapped in paper. She put a pot on and did not ask what he wanted. They ate at the table without much conversation. Outside the light went fast, the foothills going dark in stages. The spruce first and then the fields and then the sky, holding its color along the western edge a few minutes longer than expected. He poured water from a jug. She ate. He ate. A dog she had not seen came to the door, and he got up and let it in without comment. It lay down under the table, and she felt it lean against her ankle, and she let it. She asked about the laying flock. He said they were behind the house in a covered run, and that he had been managing, which was a word that covered a considerable range of situations. He said there had been 16 birds in October, and he thought there were 14 now. He said production had dropped off in February and had not fully recovered. He said it with a flatness that was not complaint, only inventory. She said she would look in the morning. He nodded and pushed back from the table and said the outhouse was west of the machine shed and there was a pump at the side of the house that ran from the well and was good in all weather so far. He said good night and went into the other room, which she had not seen yet, and closed the door. She washed the pot and the 2 plates and set them back on the shelf. She stood at the kitchen window for a moment. The yard was dark except for a light in the machine shed she could see through the crack in the door. He had gone back out, or he had never fully come in, which told her something too. In the morning she was up before the sky fully committed to it. She lit the stove from the wood box beside it, which held enough for 2 days and would need filling after that. She found a second coffee tin behind the first, and a cloth sack of dried beans that had not been opened. She started water for the oats and went out to the laying flock. The covered run was built off the north side of the house, which meant it got no direct sun in winter and minimal sun now. The structure was sound, but the bedding was overdue to be turned. A smell confirmed it. She counted 13 birds. 2 of them showed dull feathering at the neck, and 1 stood at the far wall, not moving in the particular way of a bird that is thinking about being sick. The water was low and had a rim of green at the edge of the pan. The feed in the trough was the right kind but the wrong amount. Whoever had been measuring had been guessing. She went back inside and served the oats. He came in from outside, coat still on, and stopped when he saw the bowl on the table. He sat. She told him what she had found. She told him the waterer needed scrubbing with vinegar, the bedding needed replacing, and the bird standing at the wall might be sick or might be cold. She wasn't certain yet. She told him the run orientation was a problem she could not fully fix, but she could put a sheet of tin on the north wall to hold what heat there was. He looked at her while she said all of this, not with skepticism, with the attention of someone who has been waiting for competence and is now recalibrating around it. He said there was old tin in the machine shed. He said he could pull the bedding out today if she told him where to put it. She said the compost corner on the south side of the machine shed, if there was one. He said there was. They finished the oats. She refilled his cup from the pot. He wrapped both hands around it, the way you do when warmth is the first order of business, and sat for a moment before going back out. She spent the morning in the covered run. She moved the birds out to a temporary pen she made from a section of cattle panel. She found leaning against the machine shed and worked through the run methodically. New bedding from the bale in the barn. The waterer scrubbed with vinegar. She found under the sink and refilled and rehung at the right height. The feed measured into the trough at the right amount. She checked each bird. The sick one was not sick, she decided. It was the lowest in the order, and the others had been keeping her from the feed. She moved the waterer so it was not near the main roosting space and the feed, so there were 2 access points. She found a bag of dried kelp meal in the barn, unopened, bought, and never used. She mixed a small amount into the feed. The man who had driven her to the claim had mentioned something on the road that she had filed away without acknowledging. He had said the Hargreaves place had been in trouble since the wife left. He had said it the way people say things in small communities, where the full sentence is much longer than the words used. She had not asked which wife or when or why. Those were not her business. The state of the place was her business, and the state of the place was legible without the story. She found the accounts book in the kitchen on the shelf above the wood box. She did not open it. She noted where it was. He came in at noon. She had soup from the salt pork and the dried beans and a heel of bread she had found in the box above the stove, stale but not wrong. He ate without comment. She sat across from him and ate. Through the window she could see the covered run, the birds moving around in it now, with the purposefulness of birds who have been sorted out and know it. He looked at the run for a long moment. He said the production ought to come back. He said it as a question that was not shaped as one. She said it would if the feed was right and the bird at the wall gained some weight back. She said it might take 2 weeks. He nodded. He set his spoon in the bowl. He said there was a fence line on the east quarter that was not going to hold through the summer without work. He said he'd been putting it off. She said she had noticed the tension was low on the south wire when she'd gone out to the barn. He looked at her. He said, "You went to the barn this morning." She said she needed the bedding straw. He said there was a coil of wire on the left wall past the tractor and a box of staples on the shelf above the hydraulic fluid. He said he could get to the fence line Thursday if she could manage the morning chores. She said she could manage the morning chores. There was a garden plot on the south side of the house that had not been planted the previous season. She could tell by the surface of it how the soil had crusted over and cracked into plates rather than broken up and settled the way soil does after it has been worked. The stakes were still in, the string between them long since gone, the beds outlined by memory more than anything else. She walked the edge of it in the afternoon and pressed her boot into the surface at the far corner where it was sheltest from the wind. The top inch broke up dry and pale. Below that it was dark and cold and held moisture. It was not ruined. It had only been neglected for a season, which a soil could sustain if you caught it. She asked him at supper whether he had seed. He said there was some from the previous order. In the shed he wasn't sure what had kept. She said she would check in the morning. He said the frost date here was later than people expected, that the foothills held the cold longer than the valley. She said she had grown up in a place like that. He looked up from his plate for a moment and then looked back down. She had not spoken much about herself. He had not asked. This seemed to be a working arrangement for both of them, which suited her better than the alternative. After supper, she sat at the table with the accounts book she had taken down from the shelf. She did not ask permission. She did not announce it. She simply opened it and began to read it the way she would read any ledger that told her what a place was and was not. The account at the Longview Co-op showed a balance that had been carried forward 3 times. There was a column for livestock income that had 1 entry in October and nothing since. There was a line for equipment repair in January, a large one, that had been paid in cash, which told her something about where January had gone. She read through the winter entries without expression, and then closed the book and set it back on the shelf. He was at the table when she turned around, and he had seen her with the book, and he had not said anything. He was looking at his coffee. She said the co-op account would need attention before the end of April if he wanted to order seed on account. He looked at her. She said she thought if the eggs picked up, he could sell flats at the Longview co-op for cash and put it toward the balance. She said the flock should be producing again within 3 weeks if nothing else went wrong. He looked at her for a long moment, not with offense and not with gratitude. Exactly, with the particular attention of a man who has been managing alone long enough that the sound of a second voice working on the problem had become unfamiliar. He said he had thought about selling a few birds in the fall, but had not gotten around to it. She said the birds she had sorted out today, the 2 thin ones, those were the ones to cull when the time came, not before. He nodded once. The wind came up after dark. She lay on the cot in her room and listened to it find the window frame, a thin, insistent sound, and thought about the soil in the garden plot and how much gypsum it might need, and whether he had any in the shed, and about the feed she had ordered in her head and whether the co-op could extend it, and about the wire coil on the left wall past the tractor and whether it was the right gauge for the east fence. She was not unhappy. She was working. April came in cold and then turned, and the garden plot opened up. She started seeds in the kitchen window in cans she found in the shed, tomatoes and kale and the long-season brassicas, and set them in the south light. He moved around them without comment. Once she came in from the run to find he had shifted the tin cans on the sill so they faced the sun directly, and she had not asked him to. The laying flock came back. The 2 thin birds fattened up. The one that had stood at the wall was laying again by the 2nd week of April, a good-sized brown egg, and she put it on the kitchen table where he would see it. He saw it and said nothing, but she noticed he did not move it until evening. She had started going into Longview on Wednesdays with the co-op run, because there was a woman there, Vera Prentice, who ran the deli counter and bought eggs directly from a few homesteads on a handshake. The arrangement was not official, and the price was better than the flat rate. She had found this out by asking. She had put the first payment 3 weeks in on the table beside the accounts book. He came in from the machine shed at dusk and found it there. He stood looking at it for a moment. He said, "Whose account?" She said hers for now because the co-op balance was still carrying. He said he did not want that. She said it was not a matter of want. It was a matter of the balance. He stood for a moment longer and then sat down and looked at the money on the table. He said he would work the fence line tomorrow and the day after, and he thought he could have the east quarter done by the weekend. She said she thought so too, if the ground held. He said he had cut a cord of poplar off the north woodlot last fall that he had not gotten around to selling. He said there was a man in Black Diamond who bought it. He said he could go Saturday if she could manage the run. She said she could manage the run. He went on Saturday and came back in the late afternoon with the account balance cleared and a box of provisions from the co-op, which he set on the kitchen counter without ceremony. She looked at what was in it and started supper. They ate, and the evening was quiet, and outside the foothills went from brown to green at the lower elevations in the particular unhurried way of the foothills, which did not commit to spring until they were sure. The woman from the deli counter, Vera Prentice, stopped her in the co-op parking lot one Wednesday in May and said she had heard the Hargreaves place was looking well. She said it the way people say things when they are also saying something else. She asked whether the new arrangement was working out. She asked it with a particular kind of careful friendliness that meant she had already formed her answer and was interested in whether the answer matched. She said it was working out. She said the east fence was in and the garden was in, and the flock was at full production. She said it the way she said most things, as information. Vera Prentice nodded slowly. She said she was glad of it. She said the place had been going one way for a while. She left the direction of that unsaid. She drove back out on the secondary road with the co-op supplies in the back of the borrowed truck and thought about what Vera Prentice had meant and decided she already knew, and that it was not new information. The garden came up in May, not all of it and not without loss. She replanted the first row of beans after the last cold snap took them. But what remained came up straight and deliberate, and she stood at the edge of it one afternoon, with her hands on her hips, and felt something she did not try to name right away. He had fixed the barn door. She had not asked, and he had not mentioned it. She had come out one morning to find it sliding clean on its track, level, the upper mount reset and secure. She ran her hand along the top of it as she went past. One evening in early June, he came in later than usual. She had kept supper warm. He sat down, and she put his plate in front of him and sat across from him, and they ate in the way they had come to eat, without needing to fill the quiet. The dog was under the table, leaning against her ankle. Outside, the sky went slow and orange, and then dark over the western ridge. He said the calves on the south lease were doing well. He said he had counted them this afternoon, and the numbers were right. She said that was good. He poured the last of the coffee and set the pot back on the iron. He turned the cup in his hands, which she had come to recognize as the motion of a man working towards something he had not yet found words for. He said she had not said much about where she came from. She said no, she hadn't. He waited. She let the quiet hold for a moment, and then she said she had come from a farm east of Pincher Creek that was no longer there, and a life that had changed faster than she had expected. He said he was sorry to hear it. She said she had been too. He looked at his cup. He said he had written the notice because the place needed more than he could give it alone, and he had known that for a while and had been putting it off and had not known what he was actually asking for until it arrived. She looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the cup. She said she had not known either. That was honest. She had come prepared to work and had found that work had a shape she had not expected. He said he thought she ought to know that the arrangement as he'd written it had not been what he'd meant to write. She said she knew that. He said it had been a poor piece of writing. She said it had been adequate. He looked up then, and there was something in his face she had not seen before, or had seen in pieces and not assembled, and she looked back at him, the way you look at something you have been trying not to look at directly. The fire had dropped. She got up and added a piece to it and waited for it to catch, listening to the sound of the house in the evening wind, the window in her room that rattled slightly when the air came down off the ridge, the nail above the door that had worked itself a fraction loose over the winter. He was still at the table when she turned back. He had not moved, only turned to watch her. He said her name, which was the first time he had said it since she arrived, and then he stopped the way people stop when the thing they mean is larger than the word they started with. She crossed the room, not quickly, the way you walk towards something you have decided. She sat down in her chair and put her hands on the table, and he put his hand over hers, and they stayed there a moment in the low light with the fire behind them and the dark outside and the dog breathing under the table. He did not say anything else. She did not need him to. Summer came in over the ridge, and the garden went to height, and the laying flock was producing better than it had in years. Or so, said Vera Prentice, who had no way of knowing this but said it with authority. The east fence held through the June rains. The barn door continued to slide clean on its track. She repaired the window in her room that had rattled since March by shimming the frame with a strip of cedar she cut herself from a scrap in the machine shed. It stopped rattling the night she fixed it, and she lay there in the quiet and listened to the foothills do their evening work, the wind and the birds and the distant sound of a truck on the highway, and felt the ordinary weight of a day well spent. She had not planned for this. She had planned for work, for adequacy, for getting through a winter in a place that needed her. She had not planned for the specific quality of a June morning in the foothills when the light came over the ridge and caught the tops of the spruce and the air smelled of wet grass, and the man she had come to work for came out of the machine shed with his coat still on and saw her standing at the garden's edge and stopped in the yard and looked at her the same way she was looking at everything else, like it was something he had stopped being afraid of losing, like it was, finally, his. The chickens moved through the yard in their small, busy way. The foothills held their color into the evening. She went inside and put the kettle on, and he came in behind her, and the door closed on the light.